The following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Access Television, the City of Oshkosh, the Oshkosh Cable Television Advisory Commission, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of Eye on Oshkosh. I'm Cheryl Hentz, along with former Oshkosh Mayor and City Councilwoman Melanie Bloechl. We're very pleased to be joined on this program by the Director of the Winnebago County Human Services Department, Mark Quam. We've invited Mr. Quam to be here this evening because so many things are, continuing to go up in cost. Needs are continuing to rise, costs for those needs continuing to escalate, and yet funding for these needs is going down, down, down. And we wanted Mark to come and talk about what his department does, the various needs that his department is trying to fulfill within the county as well as within the city of Oshkosh, and what kind of a juggling act his department has to do in order to see that all those needs are met in the very best way possible. So with that, welcome. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
We appreciate you taking time out of your schedule and, as I understand it, actually rearranging your schedule somewhat to be here.
Yep, so I was glad to do it. Thank you.
We appreciate that. Let's start, Mark, by explaining to the folks exactly what your department, the Department of Human Services for the county, does.
Mm-hmm. Every county in Wisconsin has either a human service department, or they might be called social services or community programs. And in Wisconsin, the setup is that counties are the ones that administer programs that are either state or federal in nature that are supposed to help people with either disabilities, poverty, delinquency, child protective services, those sorts of things. So it's a very broad kind of mission, and all the counties in Wisconsin have some kind of a department like ours.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And obviously, under poverty come a lot of different things, Section 8 housing or some type of low-income housing. What else would come under poverty that you would be charged with?
We don't directly administer the housing programs. We work real close with the Housing Authority. Sure. The Wisconsin Works program, W2, that's been always very controversial, but things like food stamps, medical assistance, Badger Care, Medicaid for nursing homes, all those things are either administered by us or by contract with agencies.
Okay. Well, I guess from a very general standpoint, how much of a juggling act is this? And then we can start getting into some of the specifics of the various programs. But how much do you get in the way of a budget to work with? And then we can talk about what you have to do, the various things you have to do here with that budget.
It's timely because we're right in the midst of putting our budget together right this week. We've been working at it for a long time, but we're getting down to crunch time now. As far as the state of Wisconsin goes, really we haven't had much additional money for 20 years, with an exception. And the exception is anything to do with medical assistance, or Medicaid they might call it, for disabled people or seniors. There's always some new money there. The state doesn't put that money in. They pass through the federal dollar, and the only way you can access it locally is if a property tax dollar is matched up against it. So if you're at the county level, it puts you in a bad situation in that if you're wanting to help seniors live at home, not live in nursing homes, if you're wanting developmentally disabled people to live in apartments or group homes or foster homes, you can't get really much help from the state. You're having to go through the local taxpayer to come up with their, say, 40 cents on the dollar to get the 60 cents on the dollar from the feds. So in a lot of ways, Wisconsin has really stepped back from a lot of programs and said, you're on your own, hope you can work it out with the feds. And that's difficult. That's a juggling act because you're always trying to balance competing priorities for limited dollars.
Sure. So, like, do they give you a certain amount to cover everything, and then you have to divvy it up for all these various things? They just say, we're going to give you X number of dollars for your department. You divide that up however you best see fit? Or do they actually say, we're giving you X number of dollars to handle disability situations, we're giving you X number of dollars for protective services for kids? How do they do that, Mark?
It's a mishmash. We've got probably, off the top of my head, I'll say probably 200 funding sources in the department. And the ones that the state is most heavily involved with, they give you a fixed allocation, and then they create legal obligations through our state statutes and administrative rules. And just as you described it, they say, have at it, hope it works out for you. And of course, the problem is the county's on the hook for the legal consequences, not the state. So when that isn't enough money, that's where the county gets dragged into having to raise property taxes to pay for services. Other types of programs, let's say food stamps, for example. That's all controlled by the state. The dollar amount that's paid to the recipient is controlled by the state. The state actually issues the food stamp. Our only role is the administrative time to process the applications and eligibility and so on. So that's why I say it's a mishmash. It's all over.
Okay.
Because you do so much of the administrative work, the state says, here's how much you get Joe Blow who needs the food stamp because you don't have a job, and here's how we go about filling out the application and finding out if you're qualified. But you go to your local county building and they will do all the paperwork. Does the state reimburse you for those administrative costs, for literally administrating their fund?
They do, and it varies a lot from program to program how fully they reimburse. Youth programs, things like delinquency and child protective services, maybe we get 50 cents on the dollar. Things like the Wisconsin Works program, that's almost entirely state funded. It's pretty close to that. So you've got a real range of these things.
Is there a reason why? I guess I'm a little confused here, and maybe confused isn't the word. I'm a little astonished that the state, knowing full well that these are their programs, which are under their purview, they get to decide how it's going to be done, who's going to get it, but you're the local guys and gals, and you're responsible for being on the front line and having to answer all the questions and learning all of the rules that keep changing depending on which legislature swings in and which way the wind blows.
Not to mention getting all the complaints.
Yes.
Exactly. I mean, it's an arduous task to get people educated and get them up to speed, and then to educate the people who maybe have never been in the system.
Yes.
And get them up to speed on what their rights are, what they can expect, where to go for help. Why does the state feel, if you have any insight into this, why do they feel as though it's perfectly fair to only pay you 50% of the time that you're spending administering their program? I guess the better question here is, Mark, could you say to the state, you know what, this is not cost effective for us, from manpower hours to reimbursables to just the plain old headache of having to do this? We could use our staff and our services better where we're reimbursed fully and not put on the local property tax back to administer these services, and we're just not going to do that program for you. You do your own program. Can you legitimately do that?
You can't do it legally. What you're talking about sure comes up a lot with counties, though. I mean, we're all local people. We all pay property taxes. Our kids go to school, and
Sure.
we live in communities. So you hate to be an apologist for state policies that are funded, in the short, the money that's lacking is funded through property taxes. So it does come up. One of the advantages of getting this old is you have some history when you get a question like that. Outagamie County a number of years ago refused to run the income maintenance programs anymore, the food stamps, the Medicaid, and so on. Same argument you were just making. They said, these are your programs, we'll administer them for you, but we want to be paid reasonable revenues for our costs.
Right.
And the states let them kind of flounder for a while and basically said, now here's the law. Here's what the state law is. Here's what the federal law is. You're going to administer the program.
And what are what's the flip side of that? If Outagamie County says, we're not going to do this. We can't make payroll. We can't do these things without digging into another coffer to pay our people overtime or whatever we need to do these kinds of things. What can the state do to you? Do they sue you?
Varies by program, but the threat is, of course, suit, but then fiscal penalties.
So they cut your budget even further.
Right, right.
Well, isn't that clever? That's clever. So they penalize you on one side because they don't provide the proper financial backing so that you can do a thorough job, have the people that you need to disperse these programs. Because I've got to believe that you can't possibly have enough people, enough bodies to cover the amount of services that you actually provide, because I don't think anybody can understand what human services, that umbrella that you fall under. Are there enough bodies? Am I wrong? Are there enough bodies to do what you need to do in a day?
We're not in a crisis, so I'm not going to portray it that way, but to do the type of job where you could prevent a problem or head off a problem, we don't do that at all. We only deal with things that have gotten completely out of control.
So you're reactionary to everything.
Yes.
There's no proactive, there's no, can we see if there's any kind of grant money to help us with anything? Those programs don't even exist for you, do they?
They don't really exist anymore, and grants are so little help because the grants expire and we don't have a way to develop local taxing authority to make up for expired grants. So it makes you reluctant to even start a grant unless it's something really especially appealing in your particular circumstance. So I don't want to portray it like we're in a crisis for staff, but we really only have one person who does any prevention activities at all. In a perfect world, which obviously we don't live in, but in a perfect world, 10% of our department budget should be spent on primary activities with kids and families, helping parents learn how to be better parents, helping kids learn how to make better values choices. We're not funded for that. We deal with them when there's been a protective service referral and somebody's got a black eye. We deal with them when somebody has broken into a home and stolen something, a delinquent, and gets referred to us. So you're dealing with things pretty far down the pipeline.
So now the costs have doubled, if not tripled, because now you've got a kid who's already in trouble. So now they're going through the legal system,
Yes.
which is extremely costly to all of us taxpayers,
Yep.
rather than catching it on the preventative side, working with the schools and working with the parents and seeing if we can identify these kids
Yes.
and age groups and different geographic, demographic information, socioeconomic groups. Rather than identifying that on the front end, we now already have them in the juvenile system, in the human service system, and now the cost to go to court and to do whatever else you may end up having to do with them. You said that you're not in a crisis as far as personnel. Are we in Winnebago County in a crisis as far as services? And what I mean by that is we have seen a huge loss in manufacturing jobs in this community, which has sustained this community for hundreds of years. It has been a huge blow to many blue-collar, hard-working folks who have never, ever asked for anything, would never think to ask for anything. We are now seeing people who have never been in a system, who have never had to ask or would think to ask because you come from that old German, Russian, that background. But you're a hard-working background. And you find a way to buck up and we'll make it through the tough times. Are we seeing more people in the system like that than we have before?
Yes, and the system has changed too, because not too many years ago they had AFDC checks, you could get a welfare check. That's pretty much gone when W-2 came in. There are very, very few people that are able to get a check for anything. And the state pushed saying, well, we want to assist you with job training, we'll offer what we can as far as support. So they really pushed helping with daycare payments, and food stamps. So that changed it. It encouraged more people to apply than they had in the past. Then the economic downturn of the last couple of years kicked in. So we have almost twice as many families getting some kind of benefit today as we did 4 years ago, whether it's food stamps, badger care, daycare, what have you. An awful lot of business now is something related to medical care, Badger Care,
Yeah.
Healthy Start, AFTC, medical assistance. A lot of what we're doing is processing applications for some kind of medical insurance. Well, why does that happen? Because when you lose jobs, you lose your insurance, or so many employers have gotten to the point where they'll offer insurance, but it's so
The deductible
high.
is so high, and
Yeah.
there's sometimes no prescription cards.
Yeah.
So therefore, the greatest cost is in your prescriptions, and these people just simply can't afford them.
Yeah, so our business has switched a lot that way. There's hardly anybody who gets a check anymore. You know, it used to be the old welfare department and the check,
Sure.
and that's hardly at all. But you got a lot of people getting some kind of medical insurance now.
How
You're seeing,
sorry.
you said about twice as many now as you did 4 years ago.
Yeah, it's huge.
Do you have some idea, Mark, as to percentages of the residents in this county, or specifically in the city of Oshkosh? What percentage of our population is involved in your programs in one way or another?
It's in one way or another, it's real proportional just to numbers of people. You would think, well, maybe there's this neighborhood that'll affect mental health, or there's this
Sure.
neighborhood that affects poverty. On average, because of the size of the county, we're a fairly big county. More of the cases are in the southern half of the county because Oshkosh is bigger. But it's not really disproportionate if you look at the numbers of people.
Sure.
So I'm just throwing out rough numbers off the top of my
Sure.
head. The city of Oshkosh, maybe 40% of these sorts of welfare sorts of cases. You add in Omro and Winnebago County and the outlying areas, and then the northern end of the county, that gets you to your 100%. So there, you know, obviously Oshkosh is not as wealthy a community as Needham, but Needham and Ashafooya, there's a lot of poor people there, a lot of people getting benefits up there too, and
Sure.
maybe it looks a little nicer because there's a brand new Walmart or something, but it's not quite the difference from one area to another as you'd think.
Well, I want to make sure now that I understand this. 40% of the people, am I understanding this correctly then, that when you say 40%, you're saying 40% of the population in the city is involved in your programming
No,
somehow?
of our,
Okay.
if we were talking about things like food stamps, medical assistance, about 40% live in the Oshkosh area.
Okay,
of
all
our
right.
total caseload,
40% of
yeah.
your recipients.
Yeah, but we have
Okay.
we have about 15,000 people getting some kind of medical insurance, especially food stamps, nursing home care. So
Is that one of your bigger percentages? 40%?
no,
Out of that 15,000?
no, that pretty much runs in all the programs. That's about what the Oshkosh's contribution is generally. I'm just talking rough numbers today now.
Okay.
Whether it's mental health or drug and alcohol or protective services, you'd think there'd be bigger changes from one community to another on a program, but it doesn't change that much within 15 miles.
So if we wanted to get some kind of a rough idea as to how many people in Oshkosh are recipients of your program, we would take 40% of the 15,000?
That'd be rough numbers. If you want, I can pin it down more specifically. We could run a report to get it for you. But
Well, this is good for our purposes here on the program, I think. It gives us some sense of what kind of shape our community is in from a basic human and services needs standpoint.
yeah.
Well, I think the other half of that question, Cheryl, because I think you asked a very good question and a very provocative one. When you look at a 40% of potentially 15,000 people, what are the demographics of those people populations? Are we looking at elderly? Are we looking at children? Or is it a mishmash, like you said, of all different age groups and socioeconomic backgrounds? I mean, you do. It's not like you say, okay, 65 and over, that is the greatest amount of our population due to medical needs. I mean, you can't say that with any certainty, or can you?
No, we do things by age, and
Okay.
for the programs we run, it wouldn't be so much the 65 and older group. When we're involved in a service, we're just talking the welfare programs now, we're not talking some of the other things we run. But if you're looking at medical assistance, I guess
Okay.
is what we're focusing on. The older folks there would probably be getting assistance from us maybe for nursing home care. The nursing home numbers haven't changed that much over the years. What it really is things like Badger Care. It's young working class families. It's a program available to them, never was available in the past. It's a support for people that are maybe making $8 an hour with kids and trying to get by. Those are the ones that are going to be eligible for medical insurance that weren't available before, and that group, just subjectively, I would say, is growing because it's getting harder and harder to get good paying jobs with insurance, and so we're squeezing people into needing that kind of help.
You know, speaking of Badger Care, though, you mentioned Badger Care and families and Badger Care. What is available from an insurance, well, we'll call it that for lack of a better word, but I guess it truly is Medicaid. What is available in the way of Medicaid for a single-person household where there just is no insurance and there's just not enough income to afford insurance?
If you're not disabled, if you're not cognitively impaired or physically disabled, the only thing I'm aware of is a very limited program through the state of Wisconsin where they'll basically provide catastrophic insurance, catastrophic health insurance at a hefty fee for you. So they do a little bit of a safety net, but it's not much. It's not an advertised program. It's sort of.
Is that the high risk insurance that the state provides?
I think that's what it's called.
Yeah.
The name's changed a couple times.
Yeah, they keep changing the name. I think they're trying to kid us. Okay, we really do have something good for you. Well, let's change the name, because as soon as people figure out what it is, they're like, that's not such a good deal. I have to tell you, this saddens me because, being in this community my whole life and knowing the kind of people that we have in this community, to learn, and I've been reading and really kind of digging into this kind of stuff and seeing how these really solid, hardworking people are struggling and there's nothing for them. Mm-hmm. And then you can go into this program, but do you find that when you deal with folks who have never really been in a system or in any kind of program, is it difficult for them to, I'm trying to picture myself in that situation where I've been a very proud worker, a productive member of society, and through no fault of my own, I no longer have a job. I've been downsized or outsourced or whatever the hell they call it next week. Yeah. And I no longer have income. I was checking into unemployment. Tops, you can max out at like $300 a week. Yeah. How do you make ends meet at $300 a week, if you have a family and responsibilities? So now you're forced, you have no insurance, you're getting unemployment, which isn't enough to barely feed the dog and cat and yourself, and now you have to go down to social services, as we've all affectionately called you, Human Services, and we have to ask for help. Do you have people there that are like counselors that can help people understand that these services are there for them? Is it a compassionate environment that, you're bringing people in and you I'm sure you have a better understanding of what these people must be going through the very first time they come in, and how do they get introduced to this system? Do you just call up and say, hey, I need an appointment, or do you come down and say, you're not going to believe what happened to me, and like you haven't heard this story a million times, I lost my job, what do I do? Yep. How do they find you? Yeah, how do they get to you and find out what they can get to help them through these really rough times?
Well, we don't seem to have any problems with people finding us. We have plenty of business, but I think a program like yours is a real help for getting the word out in the community so that people realize, oh, I didn't realize that, or I didn't know they were there. But we have just kitty corner up the street from you here is the Wisconsin Job Center, and there's a variety of agencies in there like Volk Rehab and private employment counseling services, and then that's where we have our old-fashioned welfare workers who really have a different role from what they used to have years ago. The emphasis used to be on getting that welfare check out, and it's really changed today. Now the issue is, let's see what you're eligible for. Maybe you're eligible for medical insurance. But now that you're here, let's use the state's computer system, because there's a whole job net set up in there. let's see what we can hook you up with. Maybe you need a class on resume writing. You know, maybe you've worked in a mill for 20 years. What the hell's a resume?
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
Well, and
But now
that's true.
That's true. Yeah.
This is the world you're in, and maybe you're
Yeah.
45 and you're not ready to retire. You can't retire. So,
No.
so they have classes there for things like how to polish your skills. They'll access what money is around, although there's not as much as there used to be for retraining, but there is still some. And so the environment at the job center is really getting off of the shame and blame thing to, you know, this is the world we're in. This is the world we're
Welcome
in.
to America, because you've
Yeah.
just been outsourced. This is what you got. Now, when
Yep.
you say the job center, is that the workforce development
Yes.
center that's on
Mhm.
Algoma in
Yep.
the old AT&T building,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Right
so
to-
for folks in our viewing audience who are familiar with Oshkosh, it's right on Algoma, kind of on the corner there.
Corner of Jackson and Algoma, I think. There's a parking lot there right on
Yep.
the corner, and then the building is set back a
Right
little
next
bit.
to the safety building and Hardee's and the courthouse. Yeah.
And again, to access those services, do you need to call and make an appointment, or can you go down and make an appointment?
You can do it either way.
Okay.
You can drop in and they'll figure out what you need, or you can call it. Either way is fine. But
And there's no cost to getting those services?
No.
Because obviously people will be reluctant if they think that there may be costs associated, because
Mm-hmm.
when you're unemployed, you know, every dollar counts. And so it's very difficult for these folks, and it's
I think something that's changed, and maybe it's just a matter of getting information out to people. But a lot of people come and go through the system now. It's not like I'm on food stamps. I'm here for 10 years. You'll see people come in, particularly to get Badger Care or some kind of medical insurance, 2, 3, 6, 9 months, whatever, while they're going through some employment thing, and then eventually they're able to hook up back with insurance through a job again, and life goes on. And maybe that's fine for 5 years till the next downturn. You bop in for a little while, you get temporary help, you're back out again. So I think we're seeing more of that. I think that's going to be the trend more and more, because that seems to be the way jobs are going. You don't really see many places that stay open for 30 years and you can keep a good paying job.
Yeah, the CEOs don't have a whole lot of loyalty anymore. It's a make the quick buck, get your 6-figure bonus, and let's go to Nicaragua.
Yeah.
I kind of want to touch on something that Melanie had brought up here, Mark, and that's how people find you. And I know you said people are finding you, and that you're loaded with business, and that's good, because you're one of the few places around that is.
Yeah.
Well, not so good.
Unfortunately,
No
but-
funding.
No, well, I know. I said unfortunately,
Yeah.
but nonetheless, your doors are swinging on a regular basis. But you know, my own situation now, 2.5, 3 years ago, you know, my employer just shut down just like that. 50 some people out of work in 5 minutes time. You know,
Yep.
none of us saw it coming.
Yep.
I think that, unfortunately, I didn't need to rely on any of your programming. You know, between the unemployment and some other things, I was able to make do, and I got on my feet pretty quickly. But had that not been the case, I don't know that I would have thought to contact Human Services. And here's why I say that, because I think that a lot of times people think that, you know, a social worker puts you in contact with some of these programmings or so forth. And, you know, if you don't have a social worker, how would you get hooked up with that?
Sure.
Does it work both ways, where social workers turn people on to your services in your department, but people are also coming in on, how are they finding you if they don't have a social worker?
Social worker referrals is probably the least common.
Really?
If we're talking about economic issues, because we're not
Okay.
really talking today about child abuse or alcoholism issues, we're talking more about economic issues today. We get a lot of referrals from the schools. They also use the Workforce Development Center. There's a lot of interplay back and forth with the technical schools. As you know, when you have a downturn in the economy, lots of times people will say, well, the heck with it. That's my chance. I'm going back to school, and they'll go back to the tech school. And lots of times there's a connection there where they'll work through a tech school counselor who will say, well, did you know you might be eligible for daycare? Maybe you want to talk to the county about that. That's how you make that application. So there's a lot of that kind of interplay back and forth around training, employment, technical systems. There's a lot of information going back and forth. Most regions, and we have one in this area, have what they call workforce development boards, and they administer some job retraining monies. And usually if it's a bigger employer, well, I don't know what the size cutoff is as far as number of employees, but for bigger employers, they have to notify the state ahead of time prior to closure.
Yep.
And what the state does as part of that process is they kick in these workforce development boards, completely separate from us. It's a private nonprofit. But they will come into those settings and say, well, look, here's what's available for you as far as job retraining. We know of jobs in this part of Wisconsin. And if you need other types of help, here's what the county has to offer. So they'll kind of feed back into that stream again.
They also offer dollars for going back to school and
Yeah.
things like that, whereas if you're working for a small business, those dollars really aren't available to you. I mean, that works if you're working in a larger factory setting,
yeah.
that works, but if you're working for a smaller employer, those retrain dollars or those back to school dollars to see if you can't figure out a new career don't happen.
Well, see, and they didn't tell us about that. Because I was one of those who was affected by, I think it's 50 or more employees.
Is that the cutoff? I couldn't remember.
think, I'm not
sure. It sounds
sure.
right when you say it.
But because they had to either have given us 60 days notice or pay us 60 days severance. Well, we had 5 minutes notice.
So you got the
We
severance.
got our
Whoopee!
2 months severance pay. And they did have some private organization come in and sit down and teach us how to do this, that, and the other, but they never mentioned about any of these other things. Maybe they figured none of us would qualify, but it would have been nice had they
Nice to
mentioned
know.
it anyway.
Yeah.
You know, because someone out there may have needed the services, you know, if they've got children or whatever.
Sure. Career Pros is in our town at the Workforce Development Center, and they subcontract with the Workforce Development Board. And so lots of times in this immediate area, if there's some kind of a major cutback, they'll probably be using Career Pros to kind of get on the scene. And they're right in the same building with us at Workforce Development Center, so there's a lot of mingling and linking back and forth. Volk Rehab is there. That's another one that may come up for, you know, folks that have some sort of a disability they're recovering from.
So as people are watching this and they're saying, you know what, I think I want to call and see if there's something that I can get help with. I didn't know. When they're looking for the Winnebago County Human Services Department, they're looking in the yellow pages under government, county government.
Blue pages, probably.
Is it blue?
Government
Okay.
pages.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got
government
several
pages.
different listings in
Okay.
there.
And we're looking for Winnebago County Human Services. Is that correct?
You can find your way in several ways. We don't have it tight. We've kind of left it so that you can call several places. We'll get you started. Human Services is the easy one. You can start. If it's economic issues, I'd go for the Workforce Development Center.
Workforce Development.
And that's in there too.
whomever you call and you explain what your situation is, they can forward your call or get you a
They'll get you
number and
started.
get you in contact with the correct person.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. We talked a lot, well, we haven't talked a lot about it, and I would like to talk about it because we've talked a lot about working families. What we haven't talked about is the elderly in the community. Elderly who also worked their entire lives living on a fixed income, in many cases had no pensions because a lot of, you know, the old time factories, you never had the 401ks.
Sure.
You know, everybody thought that they would be fine on Social Security.
Yeah.
You just didn't have the 401ks. And it was interesting because I heard a young man speaking not too terribly long ago in a restaurant, and I did want to backhand him. I did not. And he said, you know, I don't feel sorry for older people that they didn't plan for their retirement. Because how can anybody believe that you could live on Social Security? What these young people don't understand is that there weren't the 401ks, there weren't the Roth IRAs, there weren't CDs. I mean, there just wasn't those kinds of programs set up for people. And that's why they're living on a lot of fixed incomes. Or they lost their hinders in the market when they tried to invest and it all went down the dumper. So we have an elderly population that is in need of services, mental health, physical well-being, housing placements, nursing home, you know, critical care, long-term care. Without putting you in a political hot seat here, Mark, there is an awful lot of discussion on what is or should happen with Parkview Health Center. Should the county be in the nursing home business, or should we privatize it all and let everybody else worry about it? From your perspective as a person who provides services and has to worry about funding and, you know, where this is all going to come from and making sure that these people are cared for, what is your perspective on all of that?
services for aged are a real big part of what we do. We've talked a lot about economic programs in the beginning of the hour, but as far as things that hit the levy for a local property tax, most of those food stamps, medical assistance really don't. Those are pretty much on the state dollar. Programs for the aged do hit the local levy, and that's where we started at the beginning of the hour talking about this matching with Medicaid dollars and how the state has backed out. You really need a continuum of resources in any community of any size. Now, if I was living in Kewaunee County and you asked me this question, or Oconto, I'd have a different answer for you, because those services in those counties are not necessarily obtained in those counties. They'll go to Green Bay or they'll go to Appleton to get specialized psychiatric care, specialized nursing home care, those sorts of things. But the care needs exist, because for every 10,000 people, you'll have so many people as seniors that have to go in nursing homes. Of that group, there's so many people that can't make it in a regular nursing home that need specialized care, so many that need psychiatric care. And it's just the law of the census.
Sure.
It's demographics, you aren't going to get away from it. So when you get to be a county our size, we're in the top 10 for counties in Wisconsin. You just have enough population that you have to plan for specialized nursing home needs. And sure, we all wish it wasn't that way, but that's the reality of it. The healthcare system is not set up to compensate private nursing homes to take on people with especially difficult or dangerous care needs. The Medicaid dollar doesn't do that. It doesn't give them enough money to begin to handle people who wander outside all night or who try to smother their roommate.
Sure.
Which happens.
Yeah.
Grandma kind of went,
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate, because these poor souls, it's not anything that they have done,
No, and you talked earlier about good working people. Boy, that's who you see when you work with the elderly. Those are folks that made our communities what they are. And sure, now they're in their 80s or whatever age, and they have a dementia, and they're a different person, but that's not what they were for the first 70 years, probably, of their lives. So you have to have some kind of a local nursing home that takes people who don't fit in other facilities. Now, I think the debate on Parkview is, well, what's the right size, what's the right cost, what's the right configuration of the building, and I don't have an opinion about that. I haven't studied that, but I reviewed the report the finance department did, and I've been through the same process when I was in Brown County, and I was very familiar with Outagamie's process when they studied it. It was quite striking, the conclusions we drew in Brown when we did the study. When I read Outagamie's report, really mirrored Winnebago's, and all that those reports all show is, here's how health care funding gets paid for in Wisconsin. There's a certain number of people need a certain type of specialized care that isn't provided in the average public nursing home. And so then you end up with the county having that obligation. I think the bigger policy issue is, why are counties in this?
Where's the state? Exactly.
Where's the state? And that, I think, is real valid. Now, you're not going to get anybody in state government to take that issue on right now, but...
No, they don't even want to deal with juvenile corrections. So, why would they possibly want to deal with elderly issues as far as long-term care? Because it's extremely costly.
It's really an issue just like jail issues. Communities across Wisconsin have built many, many, many new jails in the last decade. Well, why did they do that? Because we changed the laws in Wisconsin so that more people are arrested and detained, and then also so that county jail sentences of less than a year are an option. That's what we wanted to do in Wisconsin. Okay, we made that choice. But then we said, and now we'll fight it out 72 counties at a time on creating adequate jail space to do that. And we back into these problems by politically seizing on something to say, I'm tough on crime.
Yeah.
But jails are not paid for by the state. Jails are all paid for by local communities.
Taxpayers.
It's very similar with the nursing home issues again.
Do you, I guess maybe the better question to have asked you, and I think needs to be talked about, is, do we as a community, as a county, feel as though it's our responsibility to take care of our elderly long term? Would you say that that's an appropriate question to ask?
Sure.
Is that not the question that's really on the table? Not just can we afford to take care of them, but is it our responsibility to take care of those who have built our communities now have problems. Because really, what's the alternative? I mean, do you dump them at Winnebago and put them in a room someplace, and
We pay for that too.
Well, exactly.
We're charged,
So
the counties are charged back for that too.
So the privatization is really not a response to this, because, like you said, privatization, then they have a choice as to who they can take and who they don't take, and these special needs people or the excessive needs people, they're lost. They don't fit into that little widget group. So I think that's the question that I ask. The other part of that, though, Mark, is I have heard of situations where families will move their elderly family members into Winnebago County because we do provide excellent services. Parkview has an excellent reputation of providing services, and their staff out there is wonderful. Does that happen a lot? Does that also happen with other services that we provide, where we have people who know that Winnebago County is a good benefits county, services county, program county, that they are literally kind of flooding into Winnebago County because we have better programs than others?
No, but every county thinks that.
Okay, so that is not necessarily true.
No, I don't think that's
Okay.
valid. There are people that move in, there's people that move out. As far as Parkview specifics, probably want to get Margie Rankin on from Parkview.
Okay.
You know, I think I can just comment in terms of my own past experience in another county and understanding that if Parkview fails, I have a huge problem, because the legal obligation for those people that are protectively placed there by the courts doesn't go away. I'm the guy that has to come up with.
Where do you put them?
I can't imagine, and I'd be scared to think about having to build multiple 8-bed group homes all across Winnebago County for elderly dementia patients who need high levels of supervision. There's no way that could be cheaper.
Well,
So-
and the maintenance and the hiring of the staff, which would
Yes.
not be centrally located,
Yes.
and just the
It
nightmare.
takes expertise to work with this
Oh,
population. yeah.
absolutely, and the patience of Job, you know,
Yeah.
because the families are having a tough time.
Yeah, I think the issue for people coming into the county is really overstated, and usually what it is somebody sees one and then you conclude something greater than that. We did a study when I was in a prior county because we had the same thing. Oh, people are coming here for developmental disability services, I think it was that time. And we did some checking, and yes, indeed there were. But that was a county of 220,000, and I think for the year we counted 3 that moved in, 3 families that moved in. But we had a greater number of families that moved away. So on net,
It kind of balances
yeah.
itself out at some point.
Yeah, people
Okay.
move away and we don't think about them because they're not in eyesight, but we'll see the new person coming in. We'll say, oh, they're flooding here.
Okay.
I think what you used to see more in southern Wisconsin, Racine, Kenosha, Rock County, is people fleeing Illinois to get into Wisconsin. And there was a time period in the 90s where people were fleeing Chicago to Madison, really trying to survive. But to county hop on many of those things,
Not really?
I just don't see it. I mean, I haven't
Well,
lived in
that-
every county, but
Okay. Well, you've covered a lot of them,
Yeah.
though, Mark. I mean, you've covered a lot.
What, I mean, we have talked a goodly amount about the various services that you provide. You're trying to do an awful lot, Mark, you and your staff, with very limited funds. And as I said in the outset, funds that are continuing to be taken away by the state and then put on the Fed's back. And I don't know that they're going to give you a raise anytime soon in
no.
the funding.
Yeah.
I can feel pretty
So-
confident in saying no.
yeah.
What do you do? I mean, short of continuing to raise taxes, what kind of help does a department like yours, and I say a department like yours because there are departments like yours all across the state, but what do departments like yours, what kind of help do you need?
Well, I don't want to paint a picture of us as just being in dire straits. We have $54 million in our budget. However, we handle around 15,000 people getting some kind of a welfare benefit, and we have about another overlapping, but a different 10,000 that get protective services or foster care or meal sites. So most counties, I think you walk into, you'll say at least 1 in 10 people at any given point in time that live there are getting something from County Human Services, anywhere from birth to 3 program for disabled babies to meal sites for old people. So
You cover that too.
yeah, so it's
Wow.
very broad. How do you handle it? How do you stay ahead of it? The recent discussion about Tabor is scary because
And Tabor, just for people who are watching, is that taxpayers'
Bill of Rights.
Bill of
Yeah.
Rights that
it doesn't seem to recognize that the state of Wisconsin has created a whole web of legal mandates and requirements for counties to get things done. And we've gone a number of years now with the same process you described of most programs having either frozen or shrinking money, with the exception of Medicaid-related ones. Now we're going to accelerate that a little bit with Tabor, and it's scary. The way we've been handling it, this is just my first year here. It's my 1-year anniversary this week.
Congratulations.
You start looking at, is there a smarter way you can do something? Is there a different agency you can contract with that can help you with a piece of it? So I'll give you an example of that. We just had our board meeting today. We brought in one of our good providers to talk about a program that we have for severely emotionally disturbed kids. So these are the types of kids that set animals on fire. We were staffing one kid last week. He'd set his sister's nose on fire when she was asleep, and
Yay.
kids with very serious emotional disturbance. And the tradition in most counties for a number of years would have been you to send them to an institution somewhere for many, many years. And those are $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a month that you pay.
And would
Wow.
would we as taxpayers pay for that because mom and dad don't have it and
Yep.
okay.
Yep. And that's a need of special care services.
Okay.
Maybe we'd have gotten half of the bill paid by the state, but at least half would have been property taxes. So now we're years down the road. We have new medicines for people that have emotional disturbance, both kids and adults, and there's new ways of thinking of it. So before I got here, I give the staff a lot of credit in that department. They said, well, let's look at this a different way. Maybe there's another way to make sure the child's needs are met, but they can have contact more with their family, maybe even live with their family if the family's suitable for them. Let's bring them back and bring them to this program. And it's made a terrific difference because we've got 12 kids in that program, and we went through the board with the figures on it today. We spend about $2,600 a month per each of those 12 kids for the programs that we've got them in now, and we were spending about $7,500, $7,000 a month when they were in institutions. So
Wow.
that's a long answer to your question, but that's what we're doing a lot of.
Sure.
Is there another way to come back and rethink how we do our business that still meets the needs of the people we're responsible for, but maybe doesn't cost quite as much? Now that's 12 kids out of all the thousands. It doesn't work for everybody to rethink things. Sometimes you go to waiting lists, which we certainly have gone to in programs that we're allowed to have waiting lists. We do that. A lot of our programs you can't have waiting lists. You just take however many people come in, and that's too bad.
And
So
then what happens? Just
If you don't have
just
the money,
you don't have a choice. For example,
you go over budget and then you have to go in and tax accordingly.
that's exactly right. For example, we have to pay the inpatient bills for people who don't have
Oops.
health insurance, who end up in the state hospital for psychiatric care. So if you are picked up by the police this evening for having a mental illness and being dangerous, you're taken to Winnebago, you have no insurance, the county pays that bill. So let's theoretically say we've expended all our monies, and we're starting to, I think, look ahead having some problems to that. You have no money left in your human service department. That doesn't matter. The county's obliged
get a bill.
The county has to pay that hospital bill. So now you push it into the county board. You push it into priorities. Are we going to now start closing parks one day a week so that we can pay our hospital
Right.
bills? It just gets crazy if you stop and think through the taxpayers' Bill of Rights to its logical conclusions.
We're going to get socked in the shorts one way or the other.
Yeah, I think the issue has to be, what is it we want to pay for in Wisconsin? And if we don't want a service or we don't want a program anymore,
We have to have the courage to say no.
let's just not have some services or programs, instead of saying we can do all things for all people, and
Amen.
it'll pay you less,
Right.
it'll cost you less.
And instead of closing parks one day a week, maybe we should stop building some of the parks that some of these communities are building. One thing that we haven't addressed really a whole lot is housing. We talked about low-income housing, and you and I were talking just before the show how HUD has recently changed some of its rules as far as vouchers and that kind of thing, and that is going to affect people's housing. Neither one of us, this is just a real recent change, and neither one of us is really up on that, so I don't want to address that, but you know, there are an awful lot of single-person households that are having a heck of a time finding housing because most of the apartments being built for Section 8 low-income housing are 2-bedroom units, which is a reasonable size, I think, in today's world. But the government, the federal government, will not give waivers for a one-person household to occupy a 2-bedroom apartment. So where are these single-person households supposed to go when we have builders who are only building 2- and 3-bedroom units and there's not enough low-income housing to go around? What happens to these people?
I don't have a good answer to that one. That's a problem all over. That's from Green Bay to Fond du Lac, I know, because I have conversations with my peers there. Everybody's struggling with the same thing. There's no money for the average developer to go into anything low end. They're going to go into the high end housing market. They can make a reasonable return on their dollar. You can't blame them. The federal government is not supporting single individuals. So you hear more and more and more people sleeping on somebody's couch for 3 days, and they go to somebody else's house for 2 days.
In the United States of America, this should not be happening.
Then they're sleeping in their car.
Yeah, this should not be happening. We should be, this should be a source of shame. We talked about shame and blame for people who have lost their jobs. Our government should be ashamed of themselves that we are not taking care of our own. I mean, this is sinful.
Well, we have no money to take care of our own, Mel. We're busy sending money to other countries and, you know, sending jobs to other countries. How can we possibly have money here to take care of our folks here?
Well, very quickly, and
Go ahead.
did you get the answer that you
Yes,
that you needed?
there is no answer.
Yeah.
That's
Sorry.
the bottom line, right?
Kind of
That's
the
right.
standard
Right
response is tough luck yank. We don't have an answer.
These people fall through the cracks, and I think the point is there are far too many cracks that segments of our population are, unfortunately and shamefully, as you said,
Yes.
falling through.
Very quickly, Mark, because I know we're probably getting to the point where we want to wrap up. In the paper today, the Oshkosh Northwestern, there was, on the local section, Senator Feingold and Senator Cole talking about the Hmong refugees coming into Winnebago County and surrounding counties, Sheboygan and so forth. And, gee, big surprise, the senators didn't plan for the influx of the resettlers in their budget. So they're a little concerned. I thought that was interesting. We're a little concerned on if we're going to have the money to provide the services that these folks are going to need. And one of the things that they said in here is this population has been living as refugees in Thailand for years. Conditions in Thailand have been extremely difficult. Approximately half of the children have never received schooling. Mark, how on God's green earth are we've just talked about all of the people here in Winnebago County already, born and raised and don't have communication issues and things like that we cannot take care of. The dollars are shrinking. We are actually bringing more people into our community where the dioceses are sponsoring them and then dropping them off, and that's my words, not yours, dropping them off at Human Services doorstep, and the taxpayers and even senators are totally unprepared for this. What do we do if we get a huge influx of people? Even several families, these are usually larger families. What are we going to do as far as services? Do you even know what kind of services you're going to be required to provide?
We know roughly, based on past immigrations, what kind of problems come with. Our understanding is the newspapers are even sending a group over to try and do some field work to figure out what their needs are. They've had contact with us saying, tell us what we should be asking. Well, we can do it. I guess your question is this a sensible, prudent thing to do? And I don't
Why would we bringing more people into a county that already has unmet needs to the level that we have and stretching the dollar and taxing people? why would we sponsor more people coming in when we can't take care of what we already have, and we're having debates as to whether the elderly in our community will have a place to go?
Yeah.
That doesn't seem like rational, well thought out thinking.
It's a good example of how decisions made elsewhere trickle down locally. That's an immigration authority decision, I believe, made by the Bush administration. I'm sure.
Which Bush administration? Because I'm going to be writing letters.
I think the one we're dealing with right now.
Oh, good, because he's made some doozies, I'll tell you.
So I don't claim to be an expert on that, but it's a classic example of somebody making a decision elsewhere, not understanding how that plays out locally. And most likely that won't have a tax levy, property tax impact, but it'll probably politically circle around with either the feds or the state of Wisconsin having to supplement our Wisconsin Works program. In our area, they're talking at 8 to 18 families with an average of 5 kids per family. Sheboygan's talking about upwards of 100. Green Bay is talking of that many too. So, I mean, our problems are pretty modest compared to those, so I'll be thankful for that. But they're raising the concerns that are getting Feingold and Cole's attention. It was never something that Congress voted on or debated as a policy. This is an immigration matter, and it was decided and done, and now everybody's playing
Now we got to
catch-up.
figure out how to pay for it.
Yeah, now we're playing reaction.
We're down to about a minute and a half, but very quickly, if I'm understanding you correctly then, based on some of the things Mel asked, there is no such thing as a waiting period where someone has to be a resident of this county for X number of weeks or months prior to being able to get services, correct?
That's correct.
Well,
There's one odd exception, but I won't even go into that for the time we got here. But
Do you think that if people contacted their lawmakers, that would even be a prudent or well, I know it's prudent, but do you think it has any chance of being successful where these folks put some kind of a moratorium on these services for people who are just coming into a community where you do have to be a resident for X period of time before we do it with being able to vote and things like that?
probably not, because you get federal money wound through everything, and so particularly in our department, so wherever you have federal money, you don't usually get to pit one county against another to say you're all U.S. citizens. How can you enforce that? So.
Except that it falls back on the county if there's
Especially
a
in
shortfall
Wisconsin.
in the budget.
Especially in Wisconsin.
So, well, this hour has indeed flown by.
Well, thank you. It's been fun.
It's really, congratulations on your 1-year anniversary. I'm still not sure why anybody would want to do your job.
And we would love to have you back to talk
Great.
about specific type programs
Sure.
and what can be done. So,
Well, thank you for
thank
the-
you very much.
Thank you.
It's been a
fun.
real
Mark,
pleasure.
Thank
thank
you.
you so
And
much.
keep up the good work. And thank you, folks, for joining us. We'll see you next time. Until then, take good care and keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.